The sky that morning was pale as a bruised apple, its colors thinning at the edges where the desert swallowed the sun too soon. Colt McCrae rode with one hand loose on the reins, the other gripping a worn flask he hadn't touched in 3 months. He wasn't drinking today either. He carried it the way a man carried a memory he couldn't put down, tight but never opened. His horse, Dust, slowed near the saltbrush outcropping like she heard something he didn't. The wind shifted, cutting through Colt's collar and brushing his neck with something colder than the morning air. Not cold like winter, cold like warning. He clicked his tongue, nudging Dust forward, but the mare hesitated. Her ears flicked back. Somewhere to the east, a lone hawk shrieked once, then silence. He dismounted, boots crunching on dry, brittle grass. The wind carried something faint. Not a voice. A hum. A wheeze. It disappeared and returned, just as quiet, like someone praying without hope. Colt walked, slow and steady, past the scrub oak and coyote thorns. He almost didn't see the rope, frayed and sun-bleached, tied around the cracked stone lip of a long-dead well. It looked like it belonged to the land as forgotten as any other ruin. But then he heard her. A soft cough. Ragged. Feminine. He dropped to his knees. Looked over. She was curled at the bottom of the dry pit, her limbs tangled like a broken scarecrow, dress torn and filthy. Her lips moved but no words came out. Eyes half-lidded, fixed on nothing. Colt squinted against the light, his heart doing something it hadn't done in years, stirring. He didn't call down. He didn't ask questions. He tied off his rope to the old iron crank and lowered himself. The climb down was silent but for the small rattle of stone. When his boots touched ground, she blinked. He reached out. She flinched like an animal expecting pain. "It's all right," he said, voice low as dusk. "I got you." She didn't answer, didn't resist. When he lifted her, she barely weighed more than a bundle of sage. The bones in her wrists were raw and cut from where the rope had held her too long. The climb back up was harder with her in his arms, but Dust waited steady as ever, reins slack, eyes watchful. Colt didn't stop until she was lying on the saddle blanket, his coat wrapped around her shoulders, her face tilted toward the sun like she'd forgotten what warmth was. She said only one thing the entire ride back: "Don't take me back." He looked down. Her eyes found his. Pale green like river glass, cracked and still floating. He gave a single nod. "No one's taking you anywhere." They reached Whispering Rock by nightfall. Colt's cabin wasn't much, just 4 walls of pine, a roof that creaked when the wind rolled through, and a fire that never asked why he needed it. But that night it felt different, like something in the wood had softened. He laid her on his cot, the one no one had touched since Lydia died. The sheets still smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. He sat by her side until she slept, her breathing shallow but steadier. He didn't ask her name. Didn't want to scare the story out of her. Stories came when they were ready. Outside, the sky cracked open with stars, too many to count, too quiet to understand. He leaned on the porch rail watching them shift. Dust snorted in the dark. Inside, she stirred but didn't wake. Her wrist still bore the rope's memory. He poured water into a basin, boiled a kettle, and found the old chamomile leaves Lydia used to grow. He wasn't a healer, but he remembered how to soothe. The next morning she opened her eyes. They met his across the cabin, over a silence that spoke of broken things neither one wanted to name. "You gonna tell me your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "Willow." It didn't sound strong coming from her mouth, but it would. He nodded. "Colt." She looked at him like she'd heard of him before. Maybe she had. The West was wide but not empty. People talked. He didn't ask how she got in that well. Not yet. 4 days they moved like ghosts around each other. She swept the porch before she spoke. She mended a saddlebag with trembling fingers before she told him how her husband had died. She boiled coffee before she admitted the truth. He'd been poisoned. Maybe by his kin. Maybe just by his own sins. "Bo Carter," she said. "Married me quick. Buried quicker." Colt said nothing. "They didn't want me mournin'. Just gone." It didn't take much more to understand. Her in-laws had left her for dead. She hadn't screamed. Screaming would have told the vultures she was still breathing. One night, Colt found her by the barn, hand pressed against the flank of a dappled Mustang. The horse was still. She was calmer than he'd ever seen her. "She's not scared of me," Willow said. "She knows what it means to survive." They didn't speak much after that. But each day something small shifted. She started leaving her hair down. He started making 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. She sat closer to the fire, and he didn't flinch when her shoulder brushed his. There was no grand gesture. No music swelling in the background. Just the way she looked at his hands when he fed the chickens. Like she was trying to remember what kindness looked like. One evening, after a rainstorm washed the dust from the land, she asked, "Why did you bring me back?" He stirred the stew slower than necessary. "Because someone should have." She didn't answer, but she smiled. It was crooked. Half-finished. But real. The next morning they found boot prints near the creek. 3 pairs. Deep in the mud. And a crushed cigarette Colt didn't smoke. He stood quietly beside the tracks, jaw tight. "They're looking," he said. Willow's face drained of color. "Let them," she whispered, but her voice trembled. He loaded his rifle. By sundown they came. Jedediah Carter rode at the front. His mustache bristled like a man used to being obeyed. 2 men flanked him, silent, armed, righteous. Colt stood on the porch, rifle slung loose but ready. Jedediah dismounted slow, like a man doing a favor. "She's ours," he said. Colt said nothing. Jedediah gestured toward Willow, who stood behind the screen door, pale and upright. "She's widowed. Which means she belongs to the family that fed her, clothed her, buried her husband." Colt's voice was calm. "She's not property." Jedediah laughed. "Everything's property out here, McCrae. Even the dead." Colt's finger twitched near the trigger. "Then maybe I ought to bury you next to him." A long pause. Then Willow stepped out, barefoot, hair unbound, wind tugging her dress like it didn't know what to make of her. "She's got no claim," Jedediah barked. Willow looked him square in the eye. "I ain't yours. I ain't never been." He moved toward her. Colt stepped down off the porch. "You take one more step," he said, "and you'll leave here in a box." The men behind Jedediah shifted. Their hands hovered near their belts. But something in Colt's voice, something old and certain, held them. Jedediah spat near the sagebrush. "She's cursed. You'll see." Then he turned, mounted, and left. No gunfire. No blood. Just dust. Later, Willow sat on the porch beside Colt. The sun was bleeding into the hills, setting the horizon on fire. He handed her a tin cup. She took it, cradling it with both hands. "I thought I'd be afraid," she said. "You still can be," he replied. She looked at him, her eyes no longer clouded. "But I'm not." He didn't smile. But he didn't look away either. "You gonna stay?" he asked, voice low. She watched the sunset. "Only if you stop living like you died with her." The wind picked up. Dust stirred. Colt turned his head, studied her face. It was no longer the face of a woman who needed saving. It was the face of someone who had chosen to live. He didn't reach for her. She didn't touch him. But they sat together like 2 scars on the same skin, still healing, still hurting, still whole. Somewhere in the field, a lone hawk cried again. But this time it didn't sound like mourning. It sounded like remembering. And if you ever ride past Whispering Rock on a day when the wind smells like rain and mesquite, you might hear laughter behind that old wooden door, soft and real, like a second chance someone once thought they'd buried. And maybe that's the lesson. That the heart don't always gallop back to life. Sometimes it limps. Sometimes it stumbles. But if someone stays long enough to walk beside it, it learns to dance again.